this is Scott with Learn to Stop Hunger, and today we're going to take a look at how to implement drag and drop with HTML5. I've already got Visual Studio 2012 Express for Web open here, and I'm going to go ahead and do a new project and do an ASP.NET empty web application. I'm going to call this my project drag drop example, and I'm going to hit OK. Right out of the gate, I want to add a new HTML page, and I will call that index.html. And the next thing that I'm going to want to do is to add a script and a scripts folder. We'll do new folder, scripts. And it's a JavaScript file that I'm adding. I'm going to call that index.js. And typically you would want to put your styles in a separate CSS style sheet. For brevity of the video, I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to work with inline styles, but if you're going to do some production work, you definitely want to put that in a separate style sheet. Next thing I'm going to do, I right-clicked on the project, and I'm going to go to Manage NuGet Packages. Under Online, you would click All, and by default jQuery is going to come up here. If you don't for some reason see it, definitely make sure you're under Online, and then go up here to the search box and type jQuery. Since I've already got it here, I'm going to click on it and click Install. I'm going to use jQuery in this example, and that's why I'm installing the NuGet package. You'll see that it adds several files to our scripts folder as well there. I'm going to come back to my HTML page and add references to both jQuery, which you want the jQuery reference to be first because index.js is going to rely on the jQuery. I'm going to go over to index.js and add a reference to jQuery, and that's going to help with autocomplete within index.js. I'm going to go ahead and type in a title here, drag and drop example. And the next thing that I want to do is to go ahead and set up my divs. Actually, first I'm going to put in a title here, items. And I'm going to have one div at the top here that is going to actually contain the other divs. Or, I'm sorry, it's going to contain all the draggable items right out of the box. Alright, we're going to go ahead and put a style on this div. I'm going to put a little bit of a margin on the bottom of it to separate the content that follows it. And then I'm going to set a minimum height so you can still see it regardless of whether or not it contains items. And then finally, I'm going to put a border around it also to help to make it visible. It's going to be a 1 pixel solid black border all the way around the div. Alright, the next thing that I'm going to do is to go ahead and add a number of draggable items. And they're going to be child divs here. And the key here is that I am setting the draggable attribute. Also, I'm going to set a unique ID on each one of these. And my theme for this example is to go with hot and cold items. I'm going to have two lists that I'm going to drag to, one hot and one cold. I've already typed up the rest of these items. I'm just going to go ahead and paste them in. You got several divs here of hot and cold items. I'm going to save. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to have a container div for the two drop zone divs, and each of these are going to have labels as well. I'm going to start out with my cold box that I can drop cold items into. I'm going to set some styles on this. I'm going to make the label float at the top along with the top of the box that I can drop into, and I'm going to make it float to the left side of the screen. And my label is going to say cold. Alright, next is my actual cold container. It's going to have an ID of cold. And once again, I'm going to have an inline style here. I'm going to set a minimum width so that this thing's always going to be visible. A minimum height. I'm sorry, the height is so it's always going to be easily visible. Probably the width is going to give it a little bit more of a consistent appearance. And I'm going to give it that same 1 pixel solid black border that I gave my original div up there at the top. I'm going to float this left as well, although it will appear to the right of the label since it's defined afterwards. And finally, I'm going to put some left and right margins in this thing of 10 pixels. Alright, so that's all there is to that div. I'm going to save, and I am going to set up a hot div now. I'm going to go ahead and copy my cold div, paste it here. You can see I've got some duplicated markup now, but what I'm going to do is change up the IDs and change up the labels. Alright, so we should be ready to roll with our HTML there. I want to move on to our JavaScript to help us implement the dragging and dropping here. We're going to start out by setting up our document ready function, and that is going to load once our document is completely loaded. I'm going to pass document ready an anonymous function here. And in the anonymous function, I'm going to do a few things. First, I am going to establish the data transfer property for jQuery. And data transfer is used for drag and drop. Next, I'm going to set up some event handlers for the drag start event on all of the draggable items. So I'm going to use a jQuery selector here, and I am going to select all divs that have a draggable value of true. And then set up the event handler here for the drag start event. And now I'll define an anonymous function that receives an event as a parameter. And what we want to do then is set some data in the data transfer object so that we can store the ID of the item that is being dragged. So we're going to do E, which is our event, e.original event data transfer set data. And we need to specify a label for the data we're setting. We're just going to call it text. And then we need to pass it the attribute of the item that is being dragged. So here we've got a selector, we're selecting the item on which the event occurred, and then we're grabbing the ID attribute off of that and setting the text property on data transfer to be equal to that ID. The next thing that we're going to do is set up a drag over event handler for the two divs that will act as drop zones for us. Those divs have IDs of cold and hot, so my selector is going to pick those by ID. I'm going to set up the event handler. It's going to be the drag over event. I'm going to set up another anonymous function that receives an event as a parameter. And what we want to do here is say prevent default. This is going to prevent the default behavior and actually allow items to be dropped in these divs. And then finally, we want to set up the event handler for the drop event on both of those two drop zone divs. We can use the same selector that we used before, and our event is going to be drop. I'm going to set up another anonymous function that receives an event as the parameter. And what we're going to do here is, once again, we are going to prevent the default behavior. This is going to allow us to actually handle the dropping here on our own, not let the browser do something. And then what we're going to do is retrieve our data. We'll do which is our event object, jQuery event object, original event data transfer get data, and then we pass it the name of our property that we had established previously, which was text. And finally, we are going to end up adding the dragged item to the drop zone div, and it's going to remove the item from the original div as well here. And I should say this line isn't actually doing that move per se, it's doing the add, but it does end up, we end up with a move in the end. So we should be all set here. I'm going to go ahead and launch Chrome. And we can see how it works. We've got our original list of items up here, and then we've got our two drop zones down here. We got the cold drop zone and the hot drop zone. So I'm going to go ahead and move coffee to hot. And it actually looks like we've got a problem here. So we'll see if I can figure out what's going on. I hit F12 to bring up the debugger. And I'm going to take a look at my index.js here. Let's see here. It looks like we've got a problem with our drag over handler. So I'm going to have to go back and take a look at that here. Our error is undefined is not a function. Ooh, I see. I've got a typo there. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out and fix my typo. It should be default. I'm sure you viewers at home all caught that on my original typing of this. So I'm going to go ahead and launch Chrome again. And it launched off screen there so you couldn't see it. I'm going to bring it into view. Now we'll try dragging coffee here. And I was able to drag it, but it did not accept the drop. So let's take a look again. Get an example of some troubleshooting here. Wow, I did the same typo in two places, it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and close out here, stop my debugging, and I'm going to correct this error. So hopefully the debugging session there will be helpful to you as well. Give you some tips on how you can debug issues with this if you run into them. When you're running Chrome, you want to hit F12 to bring up that debug area. and I actually went to the sources item here, and then under scripts I could find my index.js. I can see this time there are no errors, so hopefully it's gonna run smoothly for me. I'm going to try to drag coffee here, and there we go. So it moved it into cold, removed it from items. I actually want it to be in hot, and I can move it from here to there as well. So I'm going to do that. Now, I can't actually bring it back here because this original list does not accept dropping, but I could put it back in cold if I wanted to. But really it belongs in hot, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. You can move the items appropriate to cold into the cold list, and then some items for hot here, and then of course root beer is cold. So that's pretty much all there is to it, and I hope that my video was helpful, and hopefully my errors also proved helpful to you as well, as far as giving you some tips on how you can debug issues with the dragging and dropping. Anyway, that's all I have for today, and I hope you enjoyed the video.